Barcelona was unreal, babe, he said, dropping the bags onto our living room couch like a magician presenting a grand finale. You should have seen the rooftop pool at the W, insane views. Oh, and I got you something. He pulled out a silk scarf with a price tag that made my stomach tighten, for the wrong reasons. I just smiled and leaned against the kitchen doorway, watching him like a wildlife photographer tracking a peacock in heat. He had no idea. No clue what kind of trouble he'd brought back with him, tucked between his Gucci sneakers and receipts soaked in gin and ego. You look happy, I said calmly, folding my arms. He winked. You should try it sometime. My name is Naomi Whitaker. I'm 33, and I work in data breach analysis for a cybersecurity firm in Denver. I don't just trace hackers, I design fraud simulations to test multi-million-dollar systems. I know every way someone can digitally screw you over, and how to catch them doing it. Which made it kind of poetic, in a sick way, that my husband thought he could scam me. Blake and I met when I was 28. He was charming, magnetic, a golden retriever in human form. I fell hard. We married fast. And for the first year, I believed in the dream, the late-night talks, the business ideas scribbled on napkins, the grand promises of success just over the next horizon. But dreams rot when you're the only one paying the bills. Blake never held down a job for more than a season. He pitched startups like he was auditioning for Shark Tank, but the only thing he ever invested in was my bank account. I kept thinking, he'll get there. He's just figuring it out. I let it slide, his credit score, the bounced checks, the temporary use of my cards. Until I stopped. I separated our finances. Quietly. Carefully. I even built a fake credit card profile, a decoy I'd use during corporate training demos. It was tied to our firm's internal fraud detection system. Alerts, logs, the whole 9 yards. It looked real but wasn't connected to any of my actual money. And that's the card he stole. It happened on a Wednesday night. I'd gone to bed early after pulling a 16-hour shift. Blake said he was going to stay up and do some research. I woke up around 2 a.m. and noticed the office light was still on. He was hunched over my laptop, mumbling into his phone. I didn't say anything. Just watched. Memorized. The next morning, I logged in and saw the charges, $2,300 at a luxury airline site. $8,400 at a beachfront hotel. Then the boutiques. The rooftop bars. The bottle service. Over $40,000 within 3 days. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I smiled. Because Blake had just walked into a digital minefield. Every charge triggered a silent alert. Every IP address was logged. Every location geotagged. I called Cassandra, my attorney, and forwarded the data to Agent Dawson with the Financial Crimes Unit. They called it a slam dunk. I called it insurance finally paying off. When Blake got home, still glowing from his vacation, I offered him a beer and let him brag. You wouldn't believe how cheap everything is over there, he said, kicking off his loafers. Honestly, I should have been born in Spain. Everyone just gets me. I watched him lean back like he was on a throne. So, how'd you pay for all that? I asked, playing dumb. He smirked. Pulled some strings. I sipped my wine, hiding my grin behind the rim. Must have been some impressive strings. He didn't notice. Or didn't care. And that was the thing about Blake, he was always too proud to look over his shoulder. He thought he'd gotten away with something. He didn't realize the walls were already closing in. And I wasn't going to lift a finger to save him. The first alert came before his plane even landed, first-class ticket, booked from my decoy card. The fraud system pinged me before I finished my morning coffee. By lunchtime, He'd checked into a 5-star hotel in Barcelona. That night? A $1,200 dinner with a view of the Mediterranean, complete with imported champagne. Every swipe was like a breadcrumb in a trail he didn't know he was leaving straight into a legal ambush. I watched it all unfold from my laptop like a live documentary on arrogance. Blake acted like he'd won the damn lottery. He posed for pictures with gold leaf cocktails, tagged himself in rooftop clubs, and bought 3 pairs of Italian leather shoes in 2 hours. He was living large. And every second of it was being tracked. I looped in Cassandra, my lawyer, and forwarded everything to Agent Dawson at the Financial Crimes Unit. I'd worked with Dawson before during a corporate breach simulation. He knew my systems were airtight. He didn't even blink when I laid out the trap. "Let him keep going," Dawson said. "He's building our case for us." So that's what I did. I watched, waited, and gathered evidence like a seasoned collector. Receipts, IP logs, timestamps, merchant IDs, it was all there. Every transaction was an admission. Every luxury item. A signed confession. On day 5, Blake bought himself a limited edition watch. 10 grand. His caption, "Work hard, play harder." I stared at the screen, then at the clock on my wall. Work hard. He hadn't worked a full-time job in over 2 years. And as for playing harder, well, I hoped he enjoyed it. Because this was the last vacation he'd be taking for a long, long time. He came home a week later, smelling like expensive cologne and self-satisfaction. I was in the kitchen, laptop open, pretending to scroll through emails. He barged in like he was returning from war. "You would not believe how wild it got," he said, throwing his passport on the counter. "They love Americans out there. Seriously, we should move. I'm telling you, Spain is my spiritual home." I just nodded, flipping to the next page of the report I was compiling. Every word he said was being recorded. The mic I'd hidden under the fruit bowl picked up everything. His tone, his pauses, the way he laughed when he mentioned tipping a bartender with "one of your cards." My card. My fake card. He waved around a shopping bag with one hand and pulled out a pair of designer sunglasses. "Look what I picked up for you," he said. "Can't say I never spoil you." I smiled politely. "You shouldn't have." He didn't notice the edge in my voice. He was too busy basking in his own delusion. "Honestly," he said, cracking open a beer, "I might start doing this more often. Just fly off when things get stressful. It's good for my mental health, you know." I wanted to laugh. "Instead," I said, "totally. Whatever helps you feel balanced." He raised his bottle in a lazy toast. "To new beginnings." I clinked mine against his, deadpan. "Cheers." Later that night, he passed out on the couch surrounded by his loot, clothes with the tags still on, a bottle of scotch he probably couldn't pronounce, and his new, lucky, shoes. I uploaded the recording, double-checked the logs, and finalized the case file with Cassandra and Dawson. We had everything. His voice, the charges, the footage. It was like he'd built his own gallows and handed us the rope. He thought he was clever. Untouchable. Smarter than me. It happened on a Tuesday. Quiet, unassuming. One of those Denver evenings where the sky blushes pink and orange just before fading into a deep cobalt blue. I was slicing vegetables for stir-fry, the news murmuring in the background, when the knock came. 3 sharp, deliberate raps. I didn't flinch. I set the knife down, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and walked to the door like I was expecting a delivery. On the other side stood Agent Dawson in a crisp black suit, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. His expression was as serious as ever, no small talk, no pretense. Just the cold, steady look of a man here to close a case. "Is Blake Whitaker home?" he asked. I stepped aside without a word. The officers moved in first, boots echoing on hardwood. Dawson followed, his eyes scanning the apartment like he already knew the layout. Which, to be fair, he did. I'd sent photos, diagrams, and even a note about Blake's habit of leaving his wallet on the coffee table. Blake was stretched out in our faux-leather recliner, draped in the silk robe he'd bought in Spain. It still had the tag on it, $900, and he'd worn it like a crown ever since he got back. His feet were propped on the ottoman, phone in one hand, craft beer in the other. "Babe, we out of soy sauce," he called without looking up. Then he saw the badge. What the hell? His feet dropped to the floor, and he stood too fast, beer sloshing onto the rug. "What's going on?" "Blake Whitaker," Dawson said, calm as ice, "you're under arrest for credit card fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized access to financial data." Blake laughed. Actually laughed. "Wait, what? You're kidding, right?" He looked at me, waiting for the punchline. But I just stood there, arms crossed, watching the performance unfold. "This has to be a mistake," he said, eyes darting between the officers and me. "Naomi? Seriously?" "Turn around, sir," one of the officers said, already reaching for his cuffs. Blake backed up a step. "No, wait. I can explain. This is crazy. She gave me that card." He pointed at me, now genuinely panicking. "Tell them, Naomi. You gave it to me. We're married." Dawson didn't blink. "You're being recorded. Anything you say can and will be used against you." Blake's voice cracked. "This is a misunderstanding. Naomi, just tell them I didn't steal anything." I stayed silent. "Let the evidence speak." The officers cuffed him efficiently. One read him his rights while the other started gathering the evidence I'd neatly stacked in a folder on the kitchen counter: copies of the charges, screenshots of his own bragging posts, the transaction logs, the audio recordings. All of it, time-stamped, watermarked, and bulletproof. "Wait, what are you doing?" Blake yelped as Dawson took the folder. "That's private. You can't just, she's setting me up." The officers didn't even acknowledge him. They were too busy securing his wrists and checking for weapons. Blake twisted to look at me, eyes wide with betrayal. "You're doing this. You're actually doing this to me." I didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just looked him dead in the eye and said, "You did it to yourself." He sputtered. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think this makes you the hero?" I tilted my head. "No. I think it makes me safe." They walked him out in front of our neighbors. It was sunset now, and a few people had emerged onto their balconies, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Gollinger from 3B peeked through her curtains. I caught sight of her mouth forming the word, "oh," when she recognized Blake. He kept shouting until the patrol car doors shut. Then it was muffled rage and body language. Kicks against the seat. Then nothing. Inside, Dawson lingered. "You handled this well," he said. I nodded, suddenly aware of how quiet the apartment felt. "Thanks. You've got enough here to sink him. And we've already flagged the charges with the financial institutions, most of it will be reversed." "What about criminal prosecution?" "That's next," he said. "But with what we've got, a plea deal's more likely. He'll have to pay it back. Possibly serve time. At the very least, his credit and reputation are shredded." I exhaled, not quite relief, but something close. "Good." Dawson gave me a brief nod, then left, folder in hand. I stood in the entryway for a while after that. The silence buzzed in my ears. My phone lit up with a new notification, an alert from the fraud system confirming the final purchase, a taxi to the airport that never came. I looked around the apartment. the robe slung over the recliner. The trail of his things like breadcrumbs of narcissism, watch on the counter, cologne bottle half opened, overpriced travel book tossed on the floor. It was all sad, really. But not in the way you'd expect. It wasn't heartbreaking. It was pathetic. A man so obsessed with appearing powerful that he tripped on his own ego. Blake's plea deal came together faster than I expected. 1 week after the arrest, his new lawyer, some overworked public defender he probably treated like a personal assistant, called Cassandra. He was desperate to avoid jail time. Turns out, the thought of trading luxury penthouses for prison jumpsuits doesn't sit well with guys who wear silk robes to breakfast. The deal was simple: plead guilty, avoid trial, repay every cent, and complete 400 hours of community service. His assets were frozen. His passport revoked. And just like that, the man who once bragged about his international business vision was scraping together change to pay for Uber rides. I signed the divorce papers 3 days later. I didn't even pause. I just flipped to the last page, pressed the pen down with more satisfaction than I'd felt in years, and handed it to Cassandra with a steady hand. "You okay?" she asked. "I feel amazing," I said, and meant it. Blake's fall from grace was slow, humiliating, and, if I'm honest, deeply satisfying to watch. His side girlfriend, the model he met at a rooftop bar in Barcelona, ghosted him the second his name hit the news. Poof. Deleted her socials. Blocked his number. She wasn't in it for community service shifts and bounced checks. And speaking of checks, Blake's accounts were locked tighter than Fort Knox. No more flashy purchases. No more investments. The only transactions coming through were from a prepaid debit card loaded by his parents, who suddenly had their golden boy sleeping in their guest room again. He texted me. Of course he did. At first, it was denial. "You really made this a bigger deal than it had to be. We could have figured it out privately." Then came the half-hearted apologies. "I messed up. I see that now. But I never meant to hurt you." And finally, the desperate nostalgia. "Remember Tulum? When we danced in the rain? I think about that a lot." I never responded. Not once. I archived every message into a folder labeled "Closure" and moved on. My apartment, once cluttered with Blake's mess, his junky gadgets, his garish furniture choices, his absurdly large sneaker collection, became my sanctuary. I redecorated. Light wood. Clean lines. Soft fabrics. It was like learning how to breathe again. The first night after the divorce was finalized, I slept without waking once. No tension in my shoulders. No pit in my stomach. Just sleep. Pure, uninterrupted sleep. My friends noticed the change almost immediately. "You're glowing," they'd say. "What's different?" "Everything." That's what I wanted to tell them. The silence. The stillness. The lack of emotional landmines in every conversation. I could go to brunch and not worry about what drama Blake had stirred up overnight. I could plan trips without budgeting around his latest business idea. So I did. I booked a solo weekend in Telluride. Then a week in Vancouver. Then a spontaneous road trip up the Oregon coast. Each trip, I left my phone in airplane mode more than I needed to. I didn't want the world's noise bleeding into my peace. Meanwhile, Blake was making the rounds. A mutual friend mentioned seeing him in a Facebook group, offering freelance marketing work. He was rebuilding, he claimed. Starting fresh. His bio still read, entrepreneur. Visionary. Dreamer. But the dream was clearly over. He picked up side jobs, some tutoring gig, some temp event staff work. The same guy who once refused to carry groceries because manual labor kills creativity was now cleaning up after wedding receptions for minimum wage. Every now and then, someone would ask if I'd seen him. If I wanted to. I didn't. Because for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't angry. I wasn't plotting revenge. I wasn't waiting for an apology or a reckoning. I had freedom. And that was enough. One night, months after everything had settled, I found myself sitting on my balcony, glass of red wine in hand, watching the city lights blink like stars. There was music drifting from a neighbor's window, Fleetwood Mac, soft and distant. And I just sat there, toes curled under a blanket, thinking about how far I'd come. Blake had always said I was too intense, too serious, too focused. But all those things. They saved me. They built the system that caught him. They protected me when love tried to blind me. Blake's life, meanwhile, had gone up in flames. Word traveled quickly, even without my help. Denver's tech scene isn't big, and Blake had burned every bridge he ever stepped on. By the time the charges were fully processed, his name was flagged in every background check from here to Seattle. No startup would touch him. No freelance job would risk the liability. He even tried pivoting to crypto. Of course he did, but you can't network your way back into an industry that watched you go viral for felony fraud. He ended up back in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by old trophies and a mattress that probably hadn't been flipped since high school. Mutual friends said he still insisted it was all a setup. That I'd tricked him. That he'd only used the card because we were married and what's hers is mine. Nobody bought it. Especially not after the court transcripts leaked online. The one slick man in custom suits and slicked back hair was now doing community cleanup gigs in a neon vest and borrowed boots. One woman from my old Pilates class messaged me after spotting him sweeping leaves outside the courthouse. "You win," she said. But this wasn't about winning. This was about freedom. And mine tasted like coffee at sunrise, like laughter without anxiety, like silence that didn't need to be filled with explanations. For the first time in years, my phone lit up with opportunity, not stress. My friends kept cheering me on. "You look different," they'd say. "Like you're really here." I was. For the first time in years, I wasn't constantly anticipating the next mess, the next excuse, the next emotional landslide. I slept deeply. I danced in my kitchen. I caught myself smiling in the mirror for no reason at all. Blake still tried to reach out now and then. Hey, just checking in, here, thought about you today, there." His last message was a photo from years ago, us on a beach in Mexico, back when things were still new, when I didn't yet know how much of myself I'd be asked to give up. I didn't respond. Because I wasn't that woman anymore. I didn't need validation or closure. I'd written my own ending. Or rather, my own beginning. But because I finally understood that being underestimated had once made me shrink. Now. It made me sharper. Smarter. Unstoppable. Blake's name eventually disappeared from the news cycle. His texts stopped coming. He faded into the background noise of cautionary tales. "Don't be like Blake," people would say. I never corrected them. Because while he unraveled, I built. I rebuilt trust, in myself. In my instincts. In my ability to see things clearly, to act with purpose, to protect what mattered without apology.